A woman fights to keep her son in her arms, while the world around her insists on falling apart. During one cold night, fate decides to intertwine two sorrows walking in silence. "Daddy, why can't she and the baby come spend Christmas with us?" asks a small but impossible-to-ignore voice. That night it wasn't chance that acted, but the courage of a child who dared to imagine a family where there was only absence. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. And now, back to our story. Marina had always believed that life held surprises, but she never imagined she could lose everything in a single day. She was in her 8th month of pregnancy when Kevin walked out the front door for the last time, wearing that tired smile of someone working double shifts to secure a future for their unborn child. He was a rideshare driver, crisscrossing New York City from one end to the other, facing traffic, rain, and empty late-night streets, all so she could rest in those final days before the delivery. He had this protective way about him, wanting to do everything himself, so she wouldn't have to worry about anything but the baby growing inside her. That September morning, they woke up early, as always. Kevin got up at 5, dressing in the dark to be quiet. He went to the kitchen, made a quick coffee, came back to the bedroom and leaned over her. He kissed her forehead gently, ran his hand over her round belly, feeling the baby stir, and whispered that he'd be back early, that they had to finish assembling the crib. Marina mumbled something sleepy, smiling without opening her eyes. She heard the door close, his footsteps on the stairs, the car engine starting down below. Only then did she get up and go to the window, still in her nightgown, and wave, even though she knew he probably wouldn't see her. She watched the car pull away down the busy street. She didn't know it would be the last time she'd wave goodbye. The news came in a phone call mid-afternoon. The voice on the other end was formal, careful, choosing words with excessive delicacy. Extreme fatigue during a long fare, a sudden stop, something Kevin's body couldn't handle after so many sleepless nights, so many skipped meals, so much accumulated strain. Marina listened in silence, holding the phone with both hands, feeling her legs go weak. There were no screams, no apparent despair, just an emptiness that filled every corner of the apartment that was supposed to be filled with joy. She hung up, sat on the worn-out sofa, and stayed there, motionless, her hands on her belly, feeling the movements of the baby who would never know his father. The following days were a blur. A few neighbors came by with food, with words of comfort that couldn't reach the hole that had opened up inside her. Marina had to be strong, everyone said so. She had to think about the baby. And she did. She thought about him every second, with every kick she felt, every time she looked at the half-assembled crib and the little outfits they had bought piece by piece with so much sacrifice and so much love. Kevin had held each little onesie in his large, calloused hands, smiling like a child. Now Marina held the same clothes alone, trying to find strength where it seemed there was none left. The birth happened 3 weeks. Later, on a cold October morning, Marina woke up with contractions, grabbed the hospital bag she had packed and called a cab. She went to the hospital alone, walked the halls holding her belly, filled out paperwork with a trembling hand. When she finally lay down on the gurney, a kind-eyed nurse asked if there was anyone to call. Marina shook her head, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on falling. There was no one. Her mother had passed away years ago. She'd never known her father. And Kevin was an only child whose parents were also gone. It had just been the two of them, and now it would be just her and the child who was about to arrive. Luke was born at dawn, with a powerful cry that echoed through the room and seemed to bring Marina back to life. When the nurse placed the baby in her arms, she looked at that little scrunched-up face, the tightly shut eyes, the tiny hands, and understood that she couldn't give up. Luke needed her. He was all she had left of Kevin, the continuation of a love that was interrupted, but not erased. She kissed her son's forehead and made a silent promise. She would do anything, absolutely anything, to give him a decent life. The first few months were harder than Marina could have ever imagined. The money Kevin had saved up ran out quickly on overdue bills, diapers, formula, and medicine. They were renting the apartment, and the landlord had no patience for late payments. Marina tried to go back to her old job as part of the cleaning staff in a downtown office building, but she couldn't get a spot in the few subsidized daycare centers in the area. The waiting list was enormous, and paying for a private one was completely out of the question. The few options of leaving Luke with neighbors during the day cost more than she could earn working, so Marina improvised, as she always had in life. She started making cupcakes and brownies at home, using the recipes her mother had taught her as a girl. She remembered standing in the kitchen, watching every movement, every measurement, every secret that turned simple ingredients into something special. Her mother used to say that cooking with love made all the difference, that people could taste it. Marina clung to those memories like a life raft. She would wake up in the dead of night, at 3 or 4 in the morning, while Luke was still asleep in the crib next to her bed. She'd go to the small apartment kitchen and spend hours there, preparing fudge, brownies, and simple but delicious cupcakes, all made with care and the hope that it would be enough to support them both. Later, once Luke was awake, she would feed him, change him, bathe him, and then head out into the neighborhood streets, going door to door, always with the baby strapped to her back, in a colorful fabric wrap a neighbor had given her because she didn't have a stroller and had no one to leave him with. Luke got used to the routine, to the constant sway of her walking, to the warmth of his mother's body against his. Sometimes he would cry from exhaustion when the sun was too hot, and Marina would stop under a tree, sit on a park bench, and breastfeed right there, not caring about judgmental stares. She was past the point of shame. When necessity bites, dignity redefines itself. The people in the neighborhood got used to the sight of the slender woman with tired eyes but a sweet smile, who rang their doorbells offering her homemade treats. Some bought out of pity, others because they genuinely liked the taste. Marina didn't care about the reason. She was just grateful for every coin, every crumpled bill she tucked into her pocket. At night, after bathing Luke and singing him to sleep, she would sit at the kitchen table and count the day's earnings. Sometimes it was enough for the week's groceries. Sometimes it barely covered rice and beans. But Marina didn't complain. She was too ashamed to ask for help, too proud for that. She preferred to work to the point of exhaustion rather than hold out her hand. Luke was growing fast, turning into a smiley baby who lit up his mother's difficult days. He was calm, cried little, as if he understood that Marina already had enough to worry about. When she needed to work, he would stay quiet in her arms or sleep, lulled by the motion of her walking. The people who bought her sweets always commented on the baby, on how handsome he was, how he had his father's eyes. Marina would smile and thank them, treasuring those words like little gems. Luke really did look like Kevin. He had the same deep, dark eyes, the same expressive mouth. It was as if a part of him had stayed behind, materialized in this child who was growing strong despite everything. While Marina fought her battles on the streets of Queens, in a completely different part of the city, another kind of pain inhabited a house with white walls and large windows. Robert Miller had built a life that many envied. A respected civil engineer and owner of an architectural design firm, he was known for his competence, his seriousness, his impeccable work. He lived in a spacious house in Park Slope, Brooklyn, drove an imported car, traveled when he needed to. He never lacked for anything material. But behind that successful facade, Robert carried a weight no one could see. He too had lost someone, had seen his plans crumble, had experienced the pain of moving forward when everything told him to stop. Emily had been the love of his life. They met in college, married right after graduation, and built everything together, brick by brick, dream by dream. She was an architect too. They worked in the same office, shared projects, shared ideas, shared a life so naturally that Robert couldn't imagine existing without her. When Emily got pregnant with twins, Robert felt like his life finally made complete sense. It was as if everything they had built was just preparation for that moment. He renovated the entire house, prepared 2 identical nurseries with the utmost care, painted the walls a soft yellow because they didn't want to know the sexes beforehand. He bought 2 of every outfit, matching cribs, coordinating blankets. He spent hours imagining what it would be like, talking to Emily's belly every night before bed, promising to be the best father in the world. But the delivery was complicated in a way no one expected. Emily was delicate, always had been, with that petite and fragile look that hid an impressive inner strength. But her body couldn't withstand the complications that arose during labor. The hours dragged on, doctors came in and out of the room with increasingly worried expressions, and Robert felt the ground slipping from under his feet every time he looked through the small window and saw the urgent movements inside. In a matter of hours, he found himself torn between the incomprehensible joy of meeting Sophia, who was born healthy and screaming loudly, and the absolute despair of losing Emily, who passed away without ever getting to hold her daughter, without hearing her first cry, without feeling her warmth. As for the other baby, a boy, small and far too fragile, there was no time. A silent tragedy that the doctors explained with technical terms Robert couldn't even process. Words like insufficiency, complications, impossibility. He never even saw his son's face. He just held Sophia to his chest while he felt his world collapse around him. He left the hospital carrying Sophia and an emptiness the size of the world. For the first few months he was an automaton. He hired nannies, followed all the medical advice, and made sure his daughter had the very best of everything. But he couldn't look at her without feeling a pang in his chest. Sophia had Emily's eyes, the same light brown hair, the same delicate features. It was as if the woman he loved had left behind a painful continuation of herself. Robert threw himself into his work with double the intensity, spending more time at the office than at home, avoiding parties, avoiding friends, avoiding any situation that might make him feel more than he already did. Years passed, and Sophia grew up in the midst of this emotional silence. She had everything she needed materially, attended the best school, had piano, French, and swimming lessons. The house was organized, clean, running like clockwork. But something was missing, something Sophia couldn't name. She noticed her father's distant manner, the way he looked at her with tenderness but also with sadness, as if seeing someone else through her. The little girl tried to win his attention, with drawings, with impromptu dance performances in the living room, with questions about his work. Robert would respond, smile, praise her, but there was always an invisible wall between them. Sophia learned from a young age to read people's emotions, developing a sensitivity rare for her age, as if she needed to compensate for the lack of deep connection at home. By the time Sophia turned 5, she was an observant and empathetic child. At school, she was the one who comforted crying classmates, who shared her snack with anyone who forgot theirs, who noticed when someone was sad. Her. Teachers would comment to Robert about this remarkable trait, saying she had a huge heart. He would listen with pride, but also with guilt. He knew Sophia was seeking from others the affection he struggled to fully show. He tried to make up for it with gifts, with outings, with his full attention on weekends. But he knew it wasn't enough. One afternoon in December, with the streets of New York already decorated for the holidays, Robert decided to leave work early and pick Sophia up from school. He had promised to take her to buy presents for her grandparents, who were coming to spend the holidays with them. Sophia got in the car, chattering non-stop about a school project, a song she had learned, 1,000 things only a 5-year-old can string together in a single sentence. Robert listened with a genuine smile, feeling good to be there, present, part of this simple but important moment. They parked near a shopping center on the west side, but Sophia asked if they could walk around the street a bit before going in. She wanted to see the window displays, the lights, the bustle. Robert agreed, holding his daughter's small hand. As they walked along the sidewalk, it was then that they turned a corner and came upon an impromptu street fair taking up part of a side street. There were simple tents, canvas stalls, people selling a little bit of everything. Crafts, clothes, ethnic foods, sweets. The contrast with the luxurious stores of the shopping center was stark, but Sophia was immediately enchanted. She asked her father if they could get closer to see what was there. Robert hesitated for a moment, but eventually gave in. They walked among the stalls with Sophia pointing at everything, mesmerized by this world. That was completely new to her. It was at one of the last tents that her eyes stopped. A young woman with delicate features and a tired gaze was arranging sweets on makeshift trays. In her arms, she held a baby of about 1 year old, who was observing everything with curious eyes. There was something about that scene that touched Sophia immediately. Maybe it was the tenderness with which the woman held the child, or the way she spoke softly to him while arranging her products. Whatever it was, the little girl stopped and just stared. Marina noticed the child's gaze and smiled, that tired but genuine smile she always offered her customers. Sophia asked her father if they could buy some sweets. Robert approached, looked at the trays, and chose a box of brownies. Marina wrapped it carefully, thanking him in a soft voice. Luke, in her arms, reached his little hand out towards Sophia, who laughed and waved back. It was a simple, everyday moment, the kind of interaction that happens 1,000 times a day in a big city. But there was something different here, a subtle connection that none of the adults noticed, but that Sophia felt with complete clarity. She didn't want to leave. She kept looking at Marina and Luke, even as Robert held her hand to move on, as if she were seeing something his eyes couldn't reach. And maybe she was. Maybe, in that fleeting instant, Sophia had sensed that these two lives would cross hers in a way that would change everything. Maybe she recognized in that woman and baby something that was missing in her own home, in her own life. Or maybe it was just the pure, simple intuition of a child who hadn't yet learned to ignore her heart. As they walked among the stalls, Sophia pointed at everything with enthusiasm, enchanted by this universe that was completely new to her. The girl was used to air-conditioned malls, organized stores, and impeccable window displays. This impromptu street fair with its colorful tarps, its mixed smells of food and cheap perfume, its music playing from some distant radio, was like discovering a parallel world that existed right there, just a few blocks from the streets she knew, but which remained invisible to those who didn't look closely. Robert watched his daughter with a mix of surprise and tenderness. Sophia had this gift of marveling at simple things, of finding beauty where others only saw a mess. It was at one of the last tents that her eyes stopped. A young woman with delicate features marked by exhaustion was arranging sweets on makeshift trays on a plastic table. In her arms, she held a baby of about 1 year old who watched everything with curious and attentive eyes. The woman spoke softly to the child while arranging her products, straightening the little boxes, wiping away crumbs with a cloth. There was something about that scene that touched Sophia immediately. Maybe it was the tenderness with which the woman held the baby even while working. Maybe it was the way the little boy snuggled into her, trusting and calm. Maybe it was the resemblance between them, mother and son so alike, so connected. Whatever it was, the girl stopped and stared, mesmerized. Marina noticed the child's gaze and smiled, that tired but genuine smile she always offered her customers. She had learned that a smile sold more than any advertisement. Sophia smiled back, shy but interested. Robert noticed his daughter's interest and approached the stall, examining the displayed sweets. There were brownies, cupcakes, slices of carrot cake, all carefully wrapped in clear bags tied with colorful ribbons. There was a neatness to it, a care that went beyond the need to sell. You could see that these sweets were made with attention, with dedication. Marina straightened up a bit, adjusting Luke more comfortably in her arms. The baby was heavy, and she had been there since early morning, but she showed no impatience. She greeted Robert politely, asking if he'd like to try anything. Her voice was soft, tired, but gentle. Robert asked for a box of brownies and also chose a few slices of cake. As Marina prepared the package, Sophia moved closer, craning her neck to get a better look at the baby. Luke noticed the girl's presence and stretched out his chubby little hand towards her, opening and closing his fingers as if trying to grab something. Sophia laughed, delighted, and waved back. Robert observed the scene with his analytical gaze, noticing details. Marina's simple but clean clothes, the care with which she handled the sweets, the protective way she held her son, the eyes that revealed exhaustion but not defeat. "Can you help me tie this?" Marina suddenly asked Sophia, showing her the ribbon that needed to be tied into a bow on the box. The girl looked at her father for permission, and Robert nodded. Sophia approached, full of pride, and Marina guided her small hands to make the bow. "It's beautiful," the woman praised with sincerity. Sophia beamed at the compliment. Luke, in his mother's arms, babbled something incomprehensible and clapped his hands, as if he were praising her too. The two of them laughed, and even Robert managed a wider smile. It was a simple moment, the kind that happens and passes, without leaving a mark, or so it should have been. "How much is it?" Robert asked, taking out his wallet. Marina told him the price, a fair but low amount, clearly calculated to compete with large bakeries without being able to truly compete. Robert paid and left a little extra, telling her to keep the change. Marina hesitated but eventually accepted with a quiet, "Thank you." It wasn't the first time someone had done that, and she had learned to accept it without letting her shame speak louder than her need. Sophia held the box of sweets as if it were a treasure, but her eyes were still fixed on Luke, who was now trying to reach for one of the brownies on the tray. "He's one," Marina commented, noticing the girl's interest. "His name is Luke. His birthday is next month." Sophia smiled even wider. "I'm 5, she announced proudly, holding up 5 open fingers. "When I was a baby, did my mummy hold me like that too?" The question came out with the disarming innocence of children, and Robert felt his chest tighten. Before he could give one of his usual evasive answers, Marina spoke up. "I'm sure she did," she said softly. "All mothers hold their children like that when they're little. It's our way of saying we're here, that they're not alone." Sophia seemed satisfied with the answer, but there was something in her gaze, a depth rare for her age, that indicated she understood more than she let on. Robert thanked her for the sweets and made a move to leave. But Sophia didn't budge. She kept looking at Marina and Luke as if trying to memorize the image. "Daddy," she called softly. Robert knelt down to her level. "What is it, sweetie?" The girl bit her lower lip, the way she did when she was thinking about something important. "Are they going to be alone for Christmas?" The question caught Robert off guard. He looked at Marina, who immediately understood where the conversation was heading, and tried to deflect. "Oh no, we always figure something out," she began, but Sophia interrupted her with the brutal honesty of children. "But you don't have anyone with you here, do you? Just Luke?" The silence that followed was heavy. Marina didn't know what to say. It was true, she had no one. The friends she used to have had slowly drifted away, busy with their own lives. Her neighbors were polite but distant. Kevin had been her family, and now all she had was Luke. But to admit that out loud, to strangers, in the middle of a street fair, felt too heavy. She looked down at the baby in her arms, trying to find the strength to say something that didn't sound pathetic. It was Robert who broke the silence. "Sophia, I don't think we should," he started, but the girl interrupted him too. "Daddy, you always say Christmas is about being with people we love, that nobody should be alone. You say that every year." His daughter's words hit him like a punch to the gut. It was exactly what he said. He repeated those phrases while the two of them ate dinner alone in their large, empty dining room, with the table set for 2 and enough space for at least 10 more. "I know, Sophia, but we can't just—" He tried to argue, but he was already lost. The girl had that determination she had inherited from him, that quiet stubbornness that wouldn't yield. "Yes, we can," she said. "We can invite them. It doesn't have to be a big deal, just so they're not alone." Marina was blushing, clearly embarrassed. "Please, you don't have to," she started to say, but her voice broke. Sophia noticed, and her eyes filled with tears too, with that visceral empathy that was impossible to fake. The girl simply felt others' pain as if it were her own. "Please," she whispered, looking at her father with those brown eyes, just like Emily's. "Let them come." Robert looked at his daughter, then at Marina, then at the baby who was watching everything without understanding but sensing the tension in the air. He thought of all the logical reasons to say no. They were strangers. It would be awkward. It made no sense. But when he opened his mouth, it was to say the opposite. "If you wouldn't mind," he said to Marina, trying to sound casual, even though he knew nothing about this was casual. "We'd love for you to have dinner with us on Christmas. It doesn't have to be anything formal, just dinner." Sophia's right. Nobody should spend that day alone. Marina stood frozen, processing the invitation. Part of her wanted to refuse immediately, to say she couldn't accept charity, that everything was fine, that they had their own plans. But the truth was they had no plans. The truth was, she would spend Christmas feeding Luke and then crying in the bathroom after he fell asleep, just like she had the year before. The truth was, she was exhausted from pretending everything was okay. "I don't know," she murmured. She looked at Sophia, who was holding the box of sweets and staring at her with those hopeful eyes. She looked at Robert, who seemed uncomfortable but sincere. She looked at Luke, who chose that exact moment to give a wide grin, showing off the teeth that had just come in. "I don't know if it would be appropriate," she tried again, but her voice lacked conviction. "Please," Sophia asked one more time, and there was so much truth in that small voice that Marina felt her defenses crumble. "Okay," she finally relented. "If you're sure." Robert nodded, and Sophia did a little happy jump, nearly dropping the box of sweets. They exchanged phone numbers, agreed on a time. Marina jotted down the address on a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, and when she saw the street name in Park Slope, she swallowed hard. She knew it was an expensive neighborhood, a world away from her reality, but she had already accepted, and backing out now would be worse. Robert noticed her discomfort, but didn't comment. He simply confirmed that he would send a car to pick her up, and she accepted without arguing, understanding that taking 2 buses with Luke in her arms wouldn't be feasible. Sophia said goodbye with an excited wave, and Luke waved back from his mother's arms, the two of them forming an instant connection that only children can. As Robert and Sophia walked away through the stalls, Marina stood there holding Luke and trying to process what had just happened. She had agreed to have dinner at the home of strangers. Rich strangers, judging by the address and the man's demeanor. What had she done? But when she looked down and saw Luke smiling, kicking his little legs excitedly as if he knew something good had happened, she took a deep breath. Maybe it was crazy. Maybe it was a huge mistake. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. Robert and Sophia walked in silence for a few minutes. They finally entered the shopping center, but the girl's enthusiasm for buying presents had waned. She was thoughtful, clutching the box of sweets. "Daddy," she said after a while, "do you think Mommy would be happy that we invited them?" The question caught Robert off guard for the second time that afternoon. He stopped walking and knelt down to his daughter's level again. Sophia rarely mentioned her mother. He was never sure if it was because she didn't remember, or because she sensed the topic hurt him. "I think so," he answered, honestly feeling a lump in his throat. "Your mom always loved helping people. I think she would have done the same thing you did today." Sophia smiled, satisfied, and hugged her father. Robert hugged her back, feeling an emotion he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't pure happiness, not yet, but it was something like hope. And that, after so long of living on autopilot, was immense. The week leading up to Christmas was strange for Marina. She continued her usual routine, selling sweets in the neighborhood, taking care of Luke, battling the accumulating bills. But something was different now. There was that date marked on her mental calendar, that dinner that was approaching which she didn't know whether to dread or look forward to. Part of her still considered backing out, sending a text saying Luke was sick, any excuse. But every time she thought about it, she remembered Sophia's eyes, the girl's genuine empathy, and felt that giving up would be betraying that connection. So she carried on, trying not to overthink it, trying not to build expectations. Robert was on edge too. He spent the week in meetings and working on projects, but his mind kept returning to that encounter at the street fair, to the invitation he had extended almost without thinking, to the woman with tired eyes and a sweet smile who had agreed to have dinner at his home. He didn't quite understand why he had agreed with Sophia. He could have said no, made up an excuse, donated money instead of offering his home, his space, his privacy. But there was something about the whole scene, his daughter's insistence, Marina's vulnerability, that had touched a part of him that had been frozen for years. And now there was no turning back. Sophia, for her part, was radiant. She counted down the days to Christmas with an excitement Robert hadn't seen in a long time. The girl made plans, asked what they would serve, suggested games to play with Luke. She had an unshakable certainty that everything would work out, the kind of faith children have before they've known deep disappointment. Robert watched her, and felt a mix of tenderness and fear. What if this went wrong? What if it was awkward? What if Marina felt belittled? If Sophia was disappointed? But it was too late for those questions. The dinner was set, and, deep down, a part of him he wouldn't admit out loud was also looking forward to that night, also curious to see what it would be like to have that house full again, even if just for a few hours. Christmas Eve arrived with a different atmosphere. Marina woke up early, even though it was a holiday, because Luke didn't understand special dates and woke up at the same time every day. She fed him, bathed him, and dressed him in the nicest outfit he had, a blue onesie a neighbor had given them. She got ready too, choosing her simplest but best-kept dress, a discreet model in a moss-green color. She put her hair up in a low bun and applied a touch of soft lipstick she rarely wore. She looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror and took a deep breath. She was nervous. It wasn't exactly fear. It was something between anxiety and a timid hope she tried to control. The car Robert sent arrived promptly at 6 in the evening. It was a professional driver, polite, who helped Marina get Luke settled in the car seat. The drive crossed the city from one end to the other. When the car stopped in front of a large house with a front yard and an automatic gate, Marina swallowed hard. This was bigger than she had imagined. Much bigger. She thought about asking the driver to turn around, but Luke clapped his hands excitedly, and she didn't have the heart to disappoint her son. Robert opened the door as soon as she rang the bell, with Sophia already clinging to his leg, practically bouncing with excitement. Marina came in carrying Luke, who was looking around with wide eyes. The house was beautiful in a way she had only seen in magazines. High ceilings, elegant but comfortable furniture, paintings on the walls, a huge Christmas tree in the main living room. But it wasn't ostentatious. There was an emptiness to it too, as if the house were too big for the people who lived in it. Sophia immediately went to Luke, who smiled at her with the ease children have for forming bonds. The girl asked to hold the baby, and Marina, after a silent glance at Robert for permission, let her. Sophia sat on the sofa with Luke on her lap, talking to him in a low voice, showing him toys, completely absorbed. Robert offered her something to drink, and Marina accepted a glass of juice. They made small talk at first, comments about the traffic, the weather, how well the children were getting along. But gradually, the conversation deepened. Robert asked about her work, and Marina told him about her sweets, about the challenges of selling on the street. He listened with genuine attention, without the pitying air so many people had. Marina, in turn, asked questions too. She asked about Robert's work, about architecture. He talked about recent projects, about the satisfaction of seeing something that started on paper become a reality. For the first time in years, Robert found himself talking about his job not as an obligation, but as something he truly enjoyed. Marina had a way of listening that made people feel important. Sophia would interrupt now and then to show Luke something, and the two adults would pause to watch the children, smiling. Dinner was served in the kitchen. Robert decided it would be more comfortable that way, less intimidating. It was a simple but well-prepared Christmas dinner: roast turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and salads. They sat at the table, with Luke in a high chair and Sophia sitting next to him, cutting up small pieces of food to give the baby. Marina offered to do it, but the girl insisted she wanted to help. Robert watched his daughter with surprise. Sophia had never shown such interest in babies before. The conversation at the table flowed naturally. They talked about their childhoods, about memories, about old dreams. Marina told him how she had met Kevin, about the plans they had made together, about how everything had changed so suddenly. She spoke with a serenity that surprised even herself. Robert listened, in silence, and when she finished, he shared his story too. He told her about Emily, about the complicated birth, about how he had closed himself off afterward. It was the first time he had spoken about it with someone outside his family circle. The words came out with difficulty, but they came out, and Marina listened without judgment, without offering empty advice, just listened. Sophia seemed to understand that this was an important moment, even if she didn't fully comprehend the adult's words. She stayed quiet, taking care of Luke, letting her father speak. When Robert finished, silent tears were streaming down his face, and Marina, without thinking, reached her hand across the table and briefly touched his. a simple gesture of solidarity. He looked at her with gratitude, wiped his eyes, and smiled sheepishly. "Sorry," he murmured. Marina shook her head. "You don't have to apologize for feeling." They sat there in a shared silence while the children played, oblivious to the weight of that moment. After dinner, they went to the living room. Sophia showed Marina all the presents she had received, explaining each one in detail. Luke was tired and starting to get fussy, so Marina rocked him in her arms, singing softly. Robert watched the scene, mother and son so united, so connected, and felt a pang of something he couldn't name. It wasn't exactly envy. It was a kind of longing for something he'd never had, a completeness that had always eluded him. Sophia came over to Marina and asked to sing along, and the two of them stood there, lulling Luke to sleep. Robert got some blankets and made a makeshift bed for the baby on the sofa. It was all very improvised, very unplanned, but it worked. When Luke finally fell asleep, Marina sat on the floor next to the sofa, watching over her son even though he was safe. Sophia wanted to stay there too, and Robert allowed it, bringing pillows. The four of them stayed in the living room, watching a Christmas movie on TV, but paying more attention to each other than to the screen. It was a strange scene, these two broken families trying to fit their pieces together. But there was something right about it too, a comfort that came from companionship, from not being alone, from sharing the weight of existence. Marina ended up falling, asleep too, overcome by weeks of accumulated exhaustion. When she woke up a few hours later, disoriented, she saw that someone had placed a blanket over her. Sophia was curled up beside her, also asleep. Robert was in the armchair across from them, awake, watching the scene with an expression that mixed surprise and something deeper. He noticed Marina was awake and gave a discreet smile. "It looked like you needed to rest," he whispered, so as not to wake the children. Marina felt her cheeks flush. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," she began, but Robert gently interrupted. "It was good. This house needed—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Life." Marina understood what he meant. That house had everything except the essential. It had space, but not fulfillment. It had luxury, but not warmth. And that night, for a few hours, it had had both. Marina prepared to leave when Luke woke up, around midnight, but Robert insisted that the driver take her, refusing to let her take the bus with the baby at that hour. She accepted gratefully, too tired to argue. Sophia woke up just to say goodbye, hugging Marina and Luke tightly, making promises to see them again. Robert walked Marina to the car, helped get Luke settled in his car seat. Before she got in, he hesitated, then asked if she might want to come back another day. "It doesn't have to be anything formal, just for the kids to play. Sophia would be happy." Marina looked at him, trying to read his intentions, but all she saw was sincerity. "I'd like that," she answered honestly. And then they said goodbye, each returning to their own corner of the city, carrying with them the strange feeling that something had changed that night. If you were in Robert's shoes, would you have opened your home to someone you barely knew? Or would you have done something different? Tell us in the comments what you think of his actions. The days following Christmas were marked by a subtle shift in both their routines. Robert found himself thinking about Marina and Luke more often than he'd admit. He sent a few texts, simple questions about how they were, if Luke had liked the present Sophia had insisted on giving him. Marina always replied, polite, but also curious about how Sophia was doing. The conversations were brief, at first, but gradually grew longer. Robert started telling her about his day, about problems at the office, about Sophia's endless questions. Marina shared her struggles with selling sweets in the January heat, Luke's small milestones, the exhaustion that never left but that she had learned to carry. There was an ease to their messaging that surprised them both. It wasn't forced. It wasn't a performance. It was just real. Sophia pressured her father every day. "When are we going to visit Luke again? When is Marina coming over? Can I call her?" Robert, who had always struggled to handle his daughter's enthusiasm, found himself saying yes more often than no. They arranged another meeting, this time at a public park, neutral ground. It was less formal than the dinner, lighter. The children played, and Marina and Robert talked about things both trivial and profound. He asked if she had ever thought about formalizing her sweets business, getting a permanent spot, maybe a stall at a regular market. Marina confessed she had, but she didn't have the startup capital, didn't know how to get permits, had no network. Robert listened attentively, and Marina realized he was actually processing the information, not just feigning interest. The meetings became more frequent, once a week, sometimes twice, always with the excuse of the children, always planned in advance. But there was an anticipation there that went beyond childish interests. Robert started tidying up the house before Marina arrived, chose his clothes more carefully, noticed when she changed the way she wore her hair. Marina, for her part, found herself smiling when her phone buzzed with a message from him, dressed a little nicer when she knew they were meeting. Thought of him at random moments throughout the day. Neither of them admitted out loud what was happening. It was easier to pretend it was all for the kids, but not everything was harmonious. The world around them began to notice, and with the notice came judgment. A distant cousin of Robert's, Elaine, who only ever showed up when she wanted something, decided to pay a surprise visit on a day Marina was there with Luke. The woman was the type who smiled with her lips but not her eyes, who made comments that sounded like compliments but were actually barbs. She looked Marina up and down, noted the simple clothes, the careful speech of someone without a formal education, the baby playing with expensive toys that were clearly not his. "So you're Sophia's new friend," she said, in a tone that was anything but friendly. Marina felt an immediate discomfort, but answered politely. Robert sensed the tension and tried to change the subject, but Elaine was persistent. She asked questions disguised as interest, wanting to know about Marina's family, where she lived, what she did for a living. Each answer was followed by a seemingly innocent but clearly malicious comment. How interesting. How brave. How different. Marina left that visit feeling smaller than when she had arrived. In the car on the way home, she held Luke to her chest and cried silently, letting the tears fall without a sound. She knew she was different from Robert, knew they came from opposite worlds. But hearing it spelled out, seeing that look of disdain, hurt in a way she hadn't expected. Robert called later, concerned, apologizing for his cousin, saying she was always like that, not to pay her any mind. But Marina was already paying it mind. She was already questioning if this whole thing was a mistake, if she was putting herself in a situation that would only end in humiliation. She thanked him for the call, said everything was fine, but they both knew it wasn't. Days later, it was Marina's turn to face judgment from her side. A gossipy neighbor in her apartment building stopped her in the hallway, wanting to know who the man in the expensive car was who had been picking her up. "People like us don't hang out with people like that unless there's something in it for them," the woman said with poorly disguised venom. "Be careful, Marina. A rich man doesn't want anything serious with a poor woman. They use you and then go back to their own world." Marina felt anger rise but controlled herself. She answered firmly that it was none of anyone's business, but the seed of doubt had been planted. What if the neighbor was right? What if Robert was just having fun, filling a void with an interesting story he'd later tell his friends? What if she was being naive? Insecurity grew on both sides. Robert noticed Marina was more distant in her messages, more formal. Marina noticed he took longer to reply, seemed preoccupied. The meetings continued, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Sophia, with her childlike sensitivity, noticed it too. She asked if Marina was mad, if Luke was sick, if she had done something wrong. Marina reassured her, but the girl didn't seem convinced. Luke, blissfully unaware of all these adult complications, continued to smile and play as always, bringing a lightness to moments that became too heavy. It was on a rainy February afternoon that everything came to a head. Robert had invited Marina to talk, just the two of them, without the kids. She accepted despite her fear, leaving Luke with a trusted neighbor. They met at a small coffee shop far from both his neighborhood and hers. Robert was visibly nervous, fidgeting with his cup without drinking. Marina expected him to say this had all been a mistake, that it was better if they stopped seeing each other. She braced herself to hear the truth her neighbor had spoken, that he was returning to his world. But that's not what came. "I know this is complicated," Robert began, choosing his words carefully. I know we come from different realities, that people will judge, that it won't be easy. I know my family will question it, that your acquaintances will talk. I know all of that." He paused, took a deep breath, and looked her in the eyes. "But I also know that I don't want to stop seeing you. I don't want this to end because we're afraid of what other people will think. Sophia has never been as happy as she has been these past few months. And I've never—" He paused again, searching for the right words. "I've never felt so alive as I do when I'm with you and Luke." Marina felt tears, welling up but blinked them back. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Scared of not being enough. Scared that you'll realize we're from different worlds and that this won't work. Scared that Luke will get used to you and Sophia, and then we'll have to disappear from your lives." Robert reached his hand across the table, touching hers just as she had done on Christmas night. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "Scared of messing this up, of not knowing how to do this right, of repeating the same mistakes. But I'm willing to try if you are." They sat there, hands lightly, touching on the table, two wounded adults trying to find the courage to believe that it was still possible to start over. And in that moment, with the rain tapping against the window and the coffee shop buzzing around them, they decided it was worth a try. Even with the fear, even with no guarantees, even knowing the road ahead would be full of obstacles, they decided it was worth it. The following months were a slow but steady construction. Robert and Marina didn't jump into a relationship overnight. There was too much to consider, too many differences to navigate, too many fears to face. But they decided to try, one step at a time, always putting the children first. The meetings continued, more frequent now, more natural. Sometimes Robert would bring Sophia to visit Marina and Luke in their small apartment in Queens. He would arrive with his hands full of groceries, and Marina had to learn to accept help without feeling like she was losing her dignity. Robert, in turn, had to learn to offer without being condescending, to help without diminishing her. Sophia and Luke became inseparable. The girl took on the role of big sister with seriousness and affection. She taught Luke new words, played with him for hours, and protected him fiercely. Luke, for his part, would light up whenever he saw Sophia, stretching his little arms out for her to pick him up. It was beautiful to see that connection, that pure love that only children can create without complications. Robert watched his daughter and saw a profound change. Sophia was happier, lighter, more complete. Marina saw Luke developing, surrounded by affection, learning that the world could be kind. Marina also went through a transformation. Robert used his connections to get her a permanent spot at a weekend food market. It wasn't a favor, it was an opportunity. She still did everything herself, waking up before dawn, baking her sweets with the same care as always. But now she had a regular spot, regular customers, a more stable income. She managed to rent a slightly better apartment, still simple but with more space for Luke to grow. She refused to let Robert pay for anything, insisting on earning it with her own work. He respected that, understanding it was important to her. Robert changed too. That big empty house began to come to life. Again. Not because he filled it with things, but because he filled it with moments. Dinners with children's laughter, weekends with movies and popcorn, Sunday afternoons playing in the yard. He started leaving the office earlier, prioritizing time with Sophia and increasingly with Marina and Luke. He learned to turn off his phone during meals, to be truly present. He discovered he could feel joy without guilt, that loving again didn't mean betraying Emily's memory. In fact, he realized Emily would have wanted this for him. She would have wanted him to be happy, for Sophia to have a complete family, for him not to be shackled to the past forever. Robert's family, especially Elaine, didn't make it easy. There were tense conversations, malicious comments, attempts to separate the couple that wasn't even officially a couple yet. But Robert stood his ground in a way that surprised even himself. He made it clear that Marina and Luke were part of his and Sophia's life, and anyone who couldn't respect that could stay away. It was harsh, but necessary. Some people did distance themselves. Others, over time, realized their prejudice was their problem, not Marina's. They saw how hard-working, dignified, and loving she was. They saw how much lighter Robert was, how radiant Sophia was. and slowly, very slowly, they began to accept it. On Marina's side, the resistance came from a different place. It was hard for her to believe this was real, that there wasn't some catch, that Robert wouldn't wake up one day and realize he'd made a mistake. She had moments of deep insecurity, nights when she cried alone after Luke was asleep, questioning if she was good enough, if she deserved this. Robert learned to recognize these moments, to be present without smothering, to reassure without tiring. He told her it wasn't about deserving it. It was about choosing to be together. He said she was strong in a way he could never be, that she had survived things that would have broken him. He said he admired her not in spite of her hardships, but because of them. And Marina, little by little, began to believe him. There was a decisive moment, almost a year after that first meeting at the street fair. Robert invited Marina to dinner, just the two of them, without the kids. She was nervous, thinking of all the possibilities. When they sat down at the elegant but cozy restaurant, Robert took her hand across the table and said he had something to ask her. Marina's heart raced. He didn't get down on one knee, didn't make a big scene. He just looked her in the eyes with that seriousness he had, and said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her and Luke. He wanted Sophia to have a mother, Luke to have a father, for them to be a real, official family. He asked if she would marry him. Marina was silent long enough for Robert to start breaking into a cold sweat. She was processing not just the question, but everything it meant. It meant trusting completely, letting go of the walls she had built, believing she deserved love and stability. It meant accepting that not everything in life is suffering, that sometimes good things happen too. When she finally answered, it was with tears streaming down her face and a smile that lit up the entire room. She said, yes. She said she wanted that too, that she was scared too, but that she was willing to face that fear by his side. They kissed right there in public, not caring about the stares. It was the kiss of two survivors who had decided to stop just surviving and start living. The wedding was simple, just as Marina had always wanted. It wasn't in the lavish church Robert's family attended, but in a small chapel near her old neighborhood. Few guests, only the people who truly mattered. Sophia was the flower girl, carrying the rings with absolute seriousness. Luke was the ring bearer, carried by one of Robert's friends because he was still too small to walk down the aisle alone. Marina wore a simple but beautiful white dress that she had chosen and paid for herself with money she'd saved from her sweets business. Robert wore a suit, but no tie, more relaxed than he had ever been at a social event. When they exchanged vows, they both cried. They weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of relief, of finally arriving where they were meant to be. The honeymoon was short because they didn't want to be away from the children. They went to a beach town on Long Island for just a weekend. But they were the three most perfect days Marina had ever lived, waking up without immediate worries, walking on the sand hand in hand, talking about the future without fear. Robert talked about expanding the house so each child could have their own comfortable room. Marina talked about her dream of one day opening her own small bakery. They were making plans together now, and that was new for both of them. Making plans meant believing in tomorrow. When they returned, life went on, but it was a different life. Marina officially moved into the house in Park Slope. It was strange at first, all that space, that luxury that still intimidated her. But little by little, she made that place a home. She put out her things, changed small details, filled the fridge with real food instead of just the essentials. Luke got a room painted blue, full of toys Sophia insisted on picking out. Sophia, by her own choice, asked for Luke's room to be next to hers, with a connecting door between them. She wanted to be able to look after her little brother, even at night. Robert and Marina agreed, moved by that sibling love. The nights were different now. It was no longer Robert having dinner alone with Sophia at a table that was too big. It was a family of four, talking about their day, laughing at silly things, planning the weekend. Luke learned to call Robert Dad, and no one corrected him. Sophia started calling Marina Mom, and Marina cried the first time, holding that moment in her heart forever. They became a family, not because a piece of paper said so, but because they chose to be. Every single day. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were arguments, disagreements, difficult moments. Marina sometimes reverted to her old fears, thinking she wasn't doing enough, that she wasn't good enough. Robert sometimes shut down when work got stressful, retreating to that distant emotional place. But the difference now was that they talked about it. They didn't hold grudges, didn't pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. They worked through problems together like true partners, and that made all the difference. Sophia grew into an even more empathetic and loving girl. At school, she was always the one looking after the lonely kids, sharing her lunch, including everyone in games. Her teachers commented on her huge heart. Robert and Marina knew part of it came from her story, from losing her mother so young, from feeling that absence. But they also knew they had helped shape that kindness by showing her that love can heal, that family can be rebuilt, that there is always hope. Luke grew up surrounded by a love and stability Marina never imagined she could provide alone. He was a happy, healthy, energetic child. He adored his father, his sister, and his mother with the intense love of a small child. He had no memory of the hard times, of the days his mother sold sweets on, the street with him in her arms, and Marina was grateful for that. She didn't want him to carry that weight. She wanted him to have a light childhood, full of play and laughter, and that's exactly what he was having. One day, a few years later, Marina was in the kitchen preparing cakes for the market, when Sophia, now 9, came in with that serious look she got when she wanted to talk about something important. "Mom," she called, and Marina still got emotional every time she heard that word. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course, sweetie." Sophia bit her lip, the way she always did when she was thinking. "Do you still get sad thinking about Luke's first daddy?" Marina paused what she was doing, wiped her hands, sat at the table, and pulled Sophia close. It was a difficult question, but it deserved an honest answer. "Sometimes, yes," she replied calmly. "I remember him with love, with longing. He was very important to me, and because of him, I have Luke. But it's not a sadness that stops me from being happy. It's a memory that's part of who I am." Sophia processed this, nodding. "And do you think my first mum would be happy seeing us now?" Marina felt her heart clench. She pulled Sophia into a tight hug. "I'm sure of it, honey. I'm sure she's proud of the amazing girl you've become, and I'm sure she's happy knowing you're surrounded by love, even if it's not hers." Sophia snuggled into the hug. "I like having you as my mum. You're really cool. And I like having Luke as my brother, and Daddy is less sad now." Marina smiled through her tears. "I like having you guys too, more than words can say." Robert walked into the kitchen at that moment, seeing the two of them hugging. "What's going on in here?" he asked with the smile that was now a frequent feature on his face. "Girl talk," Sophia replied, letting go of Marina and running to hug her father too. Robert looked at Marina over his daughter's head, and they exchanged that look of complicity of people who know exactly how far they've come to get there. Luke came running in a second later, shouting, "Daddy, Daddy!" with the excitement of a 3-year-old. Robert scooped him up with his other arm, and there they were, the 4 of them, hugging in the kitchen that smelled of homemade cake, in a scene that was both absolutely ordinary and absolutely extraordinary. Years passed, and the family born from the improbable became the most natural thing in the world. Marina opened her own bakery, small but charming, which became a neighborhood favorite. Robert continued his work in architecture, but with more balance now, knowing that work was important, but not everything. Sophia became a brilliant teenager, still with that huge heart, planning to study psychology to help people. Luke grew up strong and healthy, full of dreams and possibilities, never once doubting that he was loved and protected. One ordinary evening with Sophia as a teenager and Luke entering his pre-teen years, the family was gathered in the living room. Sophia was studying for a test. Luke was playing a video game. Robert was reviewing some blueprints, and Marina was sewing a pillow she had bought. It was nothing special, just a regular Tuesday night. But suddenly, Marina stopped what she was doing and looked around. She looked at these people who were her family, at this house that was her home, at this life she had built brick by brick from the ruins, and she felt a gratitude so profound it could barely fit in her chest. Robert noticed her gaze and smiled. "Everything okay?" She nodded, her eyes shining. Everything's perfect. And it was true. Not because there were no problems, not because everything was easy, but because they had each other. Because this family that, by all odds, shouldn't exist, not only existed, but was strong, real, and full of love. Because they had made courageous choices when it would have been easier to give up. Because they believed that love could be reborn even after profound loss. Marina thought back to that December night, years ago, when a 5-year-old girl decided that 2 broken families should be together. She thought about how that child had seen with clarity what the adults took so long to grasp. She thought of Kevin, who would have been happy to know Luke was well cared for. She thought of Emily, who would surely be proud of the daughter she had helped raise, even from afar. She thought of all the difficulties they had faced, all the prejudices they had overcome, the entire journey they had traveled, and she understood that some stories don't follow the expected script. Sometimes love arrives when you least expect it, in the most unlikely forms, through the most unexpected people. Sometimes the family you choose is as strong as the one you're born into. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as coincidences, as chance encounters at impromptu street fairs, as invitations from children who haven't yet learned to be afraid of loving. And sometimes, just sometimes, when you have the courage to open your heart again after it's been shattered, life rewards you with something more beautiful than you ever imagined possible. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marina and Robert has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of new beginnings and love, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of the story resonated with you the most. Was it Marina's courage, Sophia's sensitivity, Robert's transformation, or perhaps the way love can be reborn when we least expect it? Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing that it's never too late to start over, that true love overcomes all barriers. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you believe that happy endings are possible, yes, even after the most difficult storms.